Voices in the void. The transmission was garbled, static streaked across the dying signal, interlaced with alien sobs and overlapping code fragments. But the message was unmistakable. This is the Yilna Coalition vessel Hope's Last, transmitting emergency distress. Nullform presence confirmed in system. Our planetary defense net has collapsed. We are requesting immediate aid from any listening civilization. Please, anyone. Captain Varith cut the broadcast and sagged against the control rail, her chitinous limbs trembling. The command deck of Hope's Last was dimly lit, by necessity, not mood. Power was at a minimum, life support was barely operational, and they were drifting, camouflaged in the debris of what used to be their third defense fleet. The Nullform didn't bother with survivors. They simply erased. Strip a world of all biological mass, break it down into base elements, and feed it into their construct factories. What came out on the other side was pure death, sterile, cold, unreasoning machines with one goal: expansion. A flicker of movement drew her eyes to the viewing pane. Beyond the shattered hulls of Crothy destroyers and the carcass of a Velm carrier, Yilna, foreburned, a charcoal smear in orbit. A soft trill from the communications panel snapped her from the haze. Lieutenant Selrek, a Cellari technician, leaned forward, antennae twitching. "Captain," he said slowly, "the signal is still broadcasting, but I've received no acknowledgement. Not from the Empire or the Draal combined. Nothing." Varith closed her inner mandibles and muttered a Glyari curse. "They heard," she said. "They always hear. But there's nothing left in us for them to save. Not worth the effort. Not worth the risk." Silence fell. Somewhere in the ship, a power relay fizzled out. The lights dimmed again. A Crothy child, one of the few civilians evacuated from Yilna Prime, let out a thin, frightened wail. They had nothing left. And then the console screamed. Not in alert tones, not in warnings, but in an old, simple ping. "External signal received," Selrek stammered. "Unknown origin. Audio only." Varith moved fast, talons tapping the deck. She activated the channel. The voice came through like thunder. Guttural. Smooth. Calm. "Alien. This is the Terran Expeditionary Force, Battle Group Warden. We've received your SOS." She stared at the speaker, as if her mandibles had stopped working. "Hold your position. Reinforcements inbound. ETA 6 hours." The line cut. No request for coordinates. No questions. No delay. Just a response and a promise. "Humans," whispered Selrek. "The Deathworlders?" Varith didn't answer. She couldn't. The words stuck in her thorax like a blade. They were myth. Warnings. Creatures of legend that evolved on a class, 12 Death World, where the oxygen was flammable, predators were born armored, and the planet itself tried to kill its inhabitants hourly. A species so reckless they left their planet not to escape, but to conquer the void. Everyone knew of them. Few had seen them, and none had survived fighting them. One of the Droon warriors, hulking and armored even in exhaustion, grunted. "Reckless brutes," he growled. "They won't survive either." Another voice, older, cracked. "They don't come to survive. They come to end things." 6 hours later, the fleet arrived. The void rippled as hyperspace ruptures tore open across the system, flaring like lightning. From each one came ships, black, angular, coated in matte armor, studded with weaponry. They moved with impossible precision, gliding like predators through the graveyard of the Coalition fleet. And they were enormous. The lead vessel dwarfed any warship the aliens had seen before, easily 3 kilometers long, bristling with turreted railguns and kinetic batteries the size of buildings. Its hull bore the name, Oblivion's Edge. Dozens more followed, frigates, cruisers, support carriers. Some glowed with shield auras. Others shimmered with what appeared to be stealth matrices, flickering in and out of visibility. Escort drones orbited them like aggressive insects. The surviving aliens crowded the viewports of Hope's Last, silent in awe and fear. Then came the second signal. Admiral Reyes stood tall on the bridge of the human flagship. His voice piped through a system-wide broadcast. "To the survivors of Yilna, "4," you called. We answered, "We are Deathworlders. We do not run. Brace for combat. Planetfall begins in 1 hour." "They're insane," muttered Selrek. "There's too few of them. The null form have consumed 2 systems already." Varith didn't answer. She was too busy staring at the trajectory overlays. The Terran ships weren't forming a perimeter. They were diving directly into low orbit. "No warning volleys," said the drone. "No scouting." "No need," said a soft, rasping voice. It belonged to an ancient Velm priest who had survived the fall of Yilna Prime. His multifaceted eyes were damp with what, on his world, counted as tears. "Why?" Varith asked. "Why would they come?" The Velm raised a trembling limb and touched the glass. "Because that is what monsters do. They come when the others hide. Not for politics. Not for alliances. For war." "Then we are saved?" Selrek asked, hope bleeding into his voice. "No," said the priest. "We are witnesses." An hour passed. From the human fleet, drop pods shot like meteorites toward the surface of Yilna 4. No soft landings. No fanfare. Just blistering reentry burns and crater impacts. On the ground, nullform swarm units adjusted their priorities, redirecting resources from scavenging to perimeter defense. It didn't matter. The first human out of the pod was 7 feet tall, wrapped in powered armor painted in dull gray. His helmet retracted long enough to spit chewing gum onto the dirt. Then the visor snapped down, glowing red. And then he moved, a blur of speed, violence, and overwhelming firepower. Plasma slugs detonated from his shoulder cannon. A combat knife larger than a Velm thigh tore through synthetic alloy like cloth. Behind him, more followed. Dozens. Hundreds. Squads of Earth's finest. Multi-species cyberdogs. Exosuit snipers. Medics armed like commandos. It was not a battle. It was a purge. And in orbit, Oblivion's Edge turned its forward railgun on the null form's primary foundry hive. A single kinetic slug, launched at relativistic speed, punched through the hive's atmospheric shields, its armor, its inner sanctum, and buried itself in the molten core of the planet. Yilna shook. The foundry erupted. Hope's last rocked as the shock wave reached space. The alien survivors screamed in terror. But the human ships held formation. Still, cold, watching. In the aftermath, Varith stood before the projection of Admiral Reyes. He looked tired, bloodied, and utterly unbothered. "Captain," he said simply, you heard our call." He nodded. "We always listen. But you never respond." He leaned forward. "Because not everyone wants what happens next. You didn't ask for us. You asked for survival. There's a difference." She shivered. "And what happens now?" He tilted his head, then smiled, a tired, grim thing. "Now," he said, "now the real war begins. The Deathworlders." The battlefield on Yilna was unrecognizable. Once a thriving colony of verdant forests and crystalline oceans, it was now a charred ruin, hollowed out by the null form, patched with scrap fortresses and mechanical hives. Ash hung in the atmosphere like gauze, thick and choking. Through that hellscape, humanity marched. Sergeant Amina Kale led her squad through the wreckage of Sector 12. Her armor, a matte black Titan-class exosuit, was smeared with null-form gore and scorch marks. A Railpulse rifle rested on her shoulder. The suit's adaptive HUD fed her pulse data, ammo counts, atmospheric readings, and squad vitals. Behind her, 7 humans moved in perfect formation. To their right padded a pair of combat canines, augmented wolves, bristling with armor plating and subdermal weapons. Overhead, drone scouts buzzed silently, feeding target data to the human fleet in orbit. This was war, and the Deathworlders were in their element. Kale's voice crackled across the unicomms. "Hive core is half a click ahead. Nullform concentrations increasing. Get ready to dance." Private Chen muttered, "They're supposed to be adaptive AIs. Why haven't they learned we're death incarnate yet?" Kale didn't answer. She didn't need to, because the null form had learned. They were just desperate enough to fight anyway. Above the planet, Oblivion's Edge monitored the assault with machine precision. Admiral Reyes stood on the command bridge, watching the feeds with eyes like storm clouds. Around him, officers and AI assistants worked in synchronized comm. A Glyeri officer, Captain Varith, stood near the command table, flanked by a translator drone. She had requested to observe the operation, and Reyes had allowed it. He wanted her to see what her people couldn't do, what his had perfected. "Explain what I'm seeing," she asked. Reyes gestured at the feed. "You're watching a multi-tiered assault doctrine. Phase 1 was orbital shock. Phase 2 is insertion and annihilation of outer defense nodes. Phase 3 is the breach. You're sending infantry into a machine hive. How many will survive?" Reyes's jaw tightened. "Enough." Varith hesitated. "You fight like you don't care about losses." "We do," Reyes said quietly. "But we care more about ending threats permanently." She looked at him, trying to find warmth. She didn't, but she did find resolve. "This isn't mercy," she whispered. "No," he said. "This is warfare as vengeance. That's what you asked for when you sent that SOS. You didn't call for help. You called for monsters." Kale's squad hit the outer rim of the hive core. Null-form drones swarmed like hornets, bipedal razor frames, airborne seekers, walking siege turrets. It was a fortress built on code and corpses. Kale didn't blink. Break formation. Apex spread. Go loud. And then it happened. Rail pulses lit the field with streaks of fire. Anti-grav mines launched with subsonic booms. Private Tor spun and hurled a plasma spear into a siege drone's optics, then ducked under a bladed limb and countered with a molten blast from her underarm cannon. A null-form Ripper charged. Kale met it head-on, absorbed the hit with her shield array, then tore through its chest plate with a fusion-augmented punch. It died screeching in code. Behind them, an orbital strike lit up the sky. A spear of pure tungsten dropped at terminal velocity. The earth quaked, but Kale kept moving. "Mark the Hive Queen's signal," she barked. Shun pulled up his scanner. "North chamber. Heavily shielded. Looks like she's buried under 10 layers of composite alloy." "Time to bring in the hammer," Kale said. She tapped her wrist module. "Detachment Delta. Activate Sunstorm Protocol." In orbit, Reyes received the code. He sighed, knowing what it meant. "Confirm package ready," he ordered. An officer nodded. "Fusion device is primed. Dropping it inside a hardened bunker buster pod. Will breach and vaporize anything within 300 meters. Varith recoiled. "You're detonating a fusion core on a live planet. That's insanity." "No," Reyes replied. "That's certainty." She looked at the holofeed. Kale's squad had already begun retreating, carving their way out through a collapsing null-form resistance. The Hive Queen had triggered a localized override, turning drones into suicide bombs. Explosions peppered the hive's inner ring, but the humans kept moving, bleeding, surviving. She realized then what terrified her most. They weren't fearless. They were used to this. The bunker buster dropped from orbit. It hit the Hive Queen's chamber like the wrath of gods. There was no explosion at first, just a brief compression of light. A sucking silence. Then a blossom of fire that bent space around it, turned steel and bone into ionized vapor, and cracked the bedrock of Yilna 4. The null-form signal cut out. All of it. Across the system. Dead. Final. Later, back aboard Oblivion's Edge, Reyes stood in the debriefing chamber with Captain Varith. She was silent for a long time, processing. Then she asked why. "Because you asked," he said simply. "No," she said. "Why do you exist like this? Why build monsters when peace was once an option?" Reyes looked toward a screen showing the wounded being offloaded, humans bloody, burned, missing limbs still alive, still smiling. "We didn't build monsters," he said. "We are monsters. Because we had to be. Earth tried peace. We bled for it. But the galaxy doesn't respect restraint. It respects force. And now, Reyes said, we answer calls no one else will. We do the things your kind won't." He stepped past her. "But don't mistake us for saviors." "Then what are you?" Reyes paused at the doorway, then looked back. "The last thing your enemies see." The fleet departed 2 days later. They left behind medical supplies, emergency habitats, data archives, and anti-nullform protocols for future defense. And warnings, not to summon humanity lightly. Not unless the galaxy was ready to see what it looked like when Deathworlders answered. The final transmission from Oblivion's Edge was short. Threat eliminated. Sector secured. Do not waste this gift. Next time we might not come.